Hello, welcome to our presentation on the development and validation of a scale to measure safety culture. The support for this study was received from a grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation, University Transportation Centers, the Mountain Plains Consortium, the University of Denver, and North Dakota State University. I'm Dr. Patrick Sherry, a professor at the University of Denver and director of the University Transportation Research Center at the University of Denver. In this presentation, we will first discuss the definition of safety culture and then the steps used to undertake the development and validation of the Denver Safety Culture Assessment Instrument. We'll provide some data that has been generated from the use of the assessment instrument in several organizations and then discuss some other implications. What is safety culture? Safety culture as a term was first used in the International Nuclear Safety Advisory Group's report on the causes of the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear accident, where a Russian nuclear reactor exploded, resulting in at least 5% of the radioactive reactor core being dispersed into the immediate vicinity and spread throughout many parts of Europe. 2 plant workers died, and a further 28 people died within a few weeks as a result of acute radiation syndrome. In addition, some 350,000 people were evacuated, and a 1,000 square mile safety zone around the reactor was created to prevent further contamination. In the subsequent 1992 report, safety culture was mentioned at least 35 times as a contributing factor in the Chernobyl disaster. Historically, the study of culture began several decades ago, first by Edward Tyler in 1871, then popularized by Margaret Mead almost 100 years ago now, with her study of adolescent behavior as a result of culture in Samoa. Then Kurt Levine in the late 1940s published his ideas about person-environment interaction, and then Deal and Kennedy in 1982 really got the attention of corporate America with a discussion of different types of corporate culture, corporate culture types. As you can see, they presented a model of 4 different types of corporate culture. Edgar Schein in the late 90s wrote about the influence of leadership on corporate culture. And then in the late 1990s also, James Reason from the UK published his seminal work on safety culture, identifying the 4 components of a safe culture, including a reporting component, a learning component, a just or fair component, and a flexible cultural component. More recently, in the news, we hear about the Boeing 737 fatal air crash, killing over 100 passengers, which was the result of a number of different factors. Mostly some of the safety culture factors appear to have been competition between business priorities and safety. One person went so far as to say that senior leadership was more interested in the business than in the engineering of a safe airplane. Also, we can see the discussion about safety behaviors resulting from differences of opinion in our own culture and other international cultures being reflected in how we respond to COVID. Different opinions, different values, freedom of expression, freedom of behavior versus protecting and behaving in a way that might minimize the injury or illness of others is at the core of this safety culture conflict. But to summarize, I think having this image of a iceberg, the tip of the iceberg being visible, and then the larger portion of the iceberg not being visible, reflects the dichotomy, if you will, between what we see in terms of safe behavior or actions within an organization being influenced by the large body of values, beliefs, perceptions, shared experience that comprise a large organization. The safety climate is one surface indication of the underlying safety culture. Think of climate as the barometer of what's going on underneath, just like a thermometer gives an indication of the underlying health of the organization. So too, then we see the overall culture influencing the specific behaviors. Safety culture refers to the sum total of behaviors, attitudes, beliefs, and practices that comprise all of the human interactions having to do with safety, health, and accidents. And in this model, safety climate is an indication of the underlying safety culture. Based on these introductory comments, our team began an investigation and a review of the literature to see if there were adequate instruments available to study safety culture in a variety of different organizations. Our review concluded that there were no consistent tools that were available that could be used across industries. Based on our review, we also determined that there was very weak psychometric data supporting the instruments that were out there, and that thus we concluded there was no high quality measure available for use. More importantly, perhaps from a conceptual framework, the instruments that we identified had very, very different sets of underlying conceptual concepts or components being measured. So we also felt that it was important to develop an instrument using a consistent underlying theoretical conceptual framework. So our model of safety culture includes just three main components: attempting to assess the underlying meaning, attempting to assess the underlying values and beliefs, and attempting to assess the behavioral expectations of members of a organization that is in fact then reflective. These things are then in fact reflective of the underlying safety culture. To develop the instrument, we created a pool of items using focus groups, meeting with employees and managers, and instilling or infusing our own reading of the literature as to what was important. We began working with a large state organization, the Colorado Department of Transportation, and invited their executives, managers, and frontline employees to help us sort through the information and come up with a list of key items. We also then used which I'll tell you about in a few moments, a cross-validation sample to verify our work with the original organization. So we administered a pool of about 70 items to the members of the Colorado Department of Transportation. We examined the data to determine whether the participants were in fact in safety critical positions in order to obtain a subset of employees who we could then conduct further analyses on, and to explore the influence of the perceptions of safety culture on various behaviors in the organizations. This subset of 970 employees who met this criteria then enabled us to perform additional analyses. We conducted a factor analysis using a principal components analysis, which identified 7 main components. We also identified 3 additional components to use to round out our overall structure. The 7 initial components and the 3 additional components were selected based on their eigenvalues. Eigenvalues being greater than 1 were selected as the primary components of the overall instrument. We also used a scree plot to determine the identification of the factors, and we came up with the resulting plot of the components and factors in the conceptual framework that consisted of these 10 factors. As you can see, the blue section here was the largest component comprising almost 50% of the variance, followed by peer personal responsibility, peer commitment, and then senior management commitment. The first component was immediate manager's commitment to safety, or your immediate supervisor. We looked then at the difference, at whether or not the instrument was able to determine differences between persons who had been involved in a self-reported near-miss incident. Results showed that when we looked at the data, persons who had been involved in and reported a near-miss produced significant differences on these scales between those who were involved and those who were not involved in near-miss incidents. These data suggest that persons who perceive a stronger safety culture are less likely to be involved and or report a near-miss incident. We also found similar discriminatory power in the replication sample. In other words, a differentiation between persons involved in near misses and those who had not, on the basis of the scores on the instrument. We also looked at, again, self-reported safe versus unsafe behavior, although this was determined by asking whether or not persons had been commended by their supervisors for safe versus unsafe behavior. Again, as you can see, the components or factors of the scale were able to statistically differentiate the persons who had been observed by supervisors as performing safe versus unsafe behaviors. We also administered the instrument to a number of different organizations. As you can see, it's successfully differentiated between the organizations. Here we have the normative sample, the state DOT, 3 separate railroads, and a maritime shipping company. As you can see, there's a range of scores on the safety culture scales, thus showing that we are able to differentiate between organizations. Incidentally, the organization with the highest, or shall we say, the best safety record is near the top of the chart on all the scales as compared to the other organizations. We also looked at some of the specific scales to see how well they differentiated and indicated the likelihood of being involved in various events. Near misses, as you can see, persons reporting that their supervisors were indeed committed to safety were 8.5 times less likely to be involved in a near miss. Persons who reported that safety versus productivity, or I should say that safety was emphasized over productivity, were 4.9 times less likely to report involvement in an accident, and persons who report a high degree of freedom to report safety incidents and information to the organization were 6.1 times less likely to report injuries. The instrument was also successful in differentiating in various subunits of an organization. As you can see from these scales, different departments did in fact show up differently on the overall scale. Lastly, since we began the study to develop the instrument, a number of different organizations have been working on safety culture as well. One of the largest efforts was conducted by the U.S. Department of Transportation, who developed a model, a 10-component model of safety culture. Interestingly, as you can see, independent of each other, the two models cover 10 different factors or components of safety culture. The US DOT model differs from ours in having the inclusion of a reporting system and effective communication as key components of the underlying safety culture. overall, as you can see, I think this high degree of overlap indicates that the convergence of the underlying conceptual structure of a model of safety culture is not far off. That concludes my report on our attempts to validate the safety culture instrument. You can read the full report here at our website. It's available to you at the site here that I've listed, or you can send me an email and I'll send you a copy. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope this was useful, and that I look forward to talking to you again soon.